Last week, I introduced Dungeon World to my real-life douchebag friends, and it actually went really well, and so I want to tell you guys all about it. But first, you might notice this video has a little bit less editing than my videos normally do. A couple reasons for that. One, I've been sick literally all week. I don't know if you can still hear it in my voice. And two, editing my videos takes a ton of work, and if you guys want updates on this, unlike my other campaign diary, I won't be able to have it be a highly edited production. Anyways, the story with this all starts a couple months ago when noted subscriber and DM on my Discord server, Joseph LeMay, said, bro, you gotta check out Grimworld. And at first I was like, okay, yeah, man, I'm kind of slammed right now, because I was, but I'll check it out eventually. And he's like, no, you've got to check out this supplement. You're gonna freaking love it. And he actually sent me $15 so that I could buy the PDF on Drive-Thru-RPG. So I was like, okay, fine. So I buy the PDF, but I didn't crack it open until last weekend. Turns out Joseph LeMay was absolutely correct. Grimworld is absolutely fantastic. I am going to do a dedicated video on it, but this is not that video. So I'm reading through Grimworld and it's getting me incredibly excited. Specifically, some of the new classes, spoilers, Grimworld introduces new classes, were getting me pumped. So I started telling my good friend Nick all about the new Grimworld classes. Now, Nick had played in my D&D 5e campaign that I ran for my douchebag real life friends 2 years ago. And I'm telling him all about how like the Slayer is addicted to killing and how the Necromancer is a fucking necromancer. And he's like, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. And then I started telling him about the pre-generated adventure fronts. The other thing about Nick is that he is a huge fan of Lovecraftian horror because he is a massive racist. Okay, I'm just kidding. He just loves Cthulhu. And so I told him, one of the pre-written adventures is kind of Cthulhu-based. You might really enjoy it. And then he hits me up and he says, yeah, I'd like to play that. I'm like, oh. So that night, we're playing Fortnite with our other friends, Davis, Kirsten, and Mike. Now, Davis, Kirsten, and Mike also played in my D&D 5e campaign 2 years ago. And so I brought it up. I was like, hey, I just got this new supplement for this game called Dungeon World. It's really cool. There's all these cool classes that you can play as. It's dope. Do you guys want to try running through it? And they were like, yeah, sure, that sounds fun. Like, we've been jonesing to play D&D. And I'm like, well, it's not D&D. It's, but it's very similar to it. And they're like, whatever Dungeons and Dragons-esque game it is, we want to play it. And I'm like, fucking sick. So we schedule a time and day for the Zero Sesh, and I send them the Dungeon World rulebook, I send them the class playbooks, and I send them the Grimworld playbooks. And I'm like, no pressure. We're going to establish all of this in the Zero session, but if you want to take a look in advance, kind of figure out what you want, here you go. Of course, before the Zero session, everybody had pretty much figured out exactly what they wanted to be. Nick decided that he wanted to be a Tusker Battlemaster, because like when we play Fortnite, he is obsessed with strategy and tactics, so it was fitting. Kirsten wanted to be a Primordial Ranger, because I don't know, because she wanted to. Davis wanted to be a Kobold Druid because he's a little nature dude. And Mike wanted to be a Boag Necromancer because he is a meme. Now, just because Mike is a meme doesn't mean that he's not a great role player, because he is a great role player and he's a great player to have at the table. He takes the world incredibly seriously, even though he is totally just comic relief throughout it. It is the best way to play a comic relief character. So he gets to the Zero session. I'm like, does everybody know what they want to play? And immediately they're like, absolutely, okay. So I walk them through character creation, filling out their playbooks and all of that just to make sure we have everything established. And then I'm like, okay, now we're going to do world creation. And I wanted to do world creation how they kind of do it in Perilous Wilds, because I thought that was really cool. But I didn't want to draw a map. So what I did instead was I went on to Perilous Shores, the online tool that I did a whole video about, and I broke down all of the tags. And then what I did was I went starting from the youngest character to the oldest character. I let them pick one tag, and there were 2 rounds of this, and then they got to create the map. So I auto-generated the map and I shared my screen, and I said, take a look at this. Every single place name can be renamed. I can't really add new place names. I'd have to put it into Photoshop. But, take a look and then tell me where your character is from and a place significant to them. And they don't necessarily have to be from someplace on this map. It could be off map. Of course, everyone ended up they're like, hey, do you see that mountain that's right over there? I want to be have a significant place there. And I'm like, oh, I said don't add new places, but whatever, fine. So we add new places to the map, and then it gets a little tricky. So when I was pitching them when we were playing Fortnite, I ran through all of the pre-generated adventures in Grimworld, and I was like, which one do you guys want to do? And they're like, we want to want to do a tale of two towns. So we're in the Zero Sesh, and leading up to this, I had a couple of ideas of why this adventuring party would be going to the two towns. The main one that I thought of was they would become some agents of the kingdom, agents of the state, and they would be sent there to investigate either a murder or a break-in. Started as a murder, turned into a break-in. And I kept asking them, I'm like, so how do you guys know each other? And they came up with a wild story. Basically, Davis's kobold, his name's Mowgli, escaped from a salt dragon in the west and ran all the way across the continent to the east. In my world, there is a massive continent that used to be the Dragon Empire, but then it fractured when the Dragon Emperor died, and it fractured into the chromatic dragons in the west and the metallic dragons in the east. Stole it from D&D. The chromatic dragons are evil, the metallic are good, but that's for a whole nother video. So Mowgli goes from west to east, and in his travels to the east, he happens upon Grog. Grog is the Boag necromancer played by Mike. And Mike sees the little kobold, and he's never seen a salt kobold before because he is from the metallic dragon lands, and salt kobolds, according to D&D, are chromatic dragons. So he starts stalking him because Grog wants a dragon in his collection of canopic jars. In Grimworld, necromancers get 3 canopic jars where they can store bodies, and he's like, I want a dragon to be one of them. So he starts stalking Mowgli all the way across the continent. And Mowgli knows that he's there, he just doesn't do anything about it. They get to Dark Hill, where they end up meeting Kirsten and Nick's characters. Kirsten's character is named Tikani, but we kept calling her Tikala Masala. Tikani is an ice primordial from the mountains, and she has a polar bear companion named Nunyet. I think it's Nunyet. It's some Inuit name. And Nick's character's name is Ishtar. He is a Tusker battlemaster, like I said. They all meet in a tavern, and they start talking and whatever. And I wasn't really getting, like, I kept asking them, I was like, okay, so then why do you guys continue to adventure together? And they were coming up with like all these answers, and it wasn't what I wanted to hear. And I should have just been more forthright about this. So I was like, okay, but like, why? And they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, but like why? And they're like, because we're like drinking buddies. And I'm like, yeah, but you can meet someone in a pub and be like, we're best friends, but that doesn't mean that you're going to go, you know, like delve into a tomb of horrors together. And they're like, okay, yeah, fair point. And I'm like, why? And they still didn't come to the answer that I wanted. So then finally I was like, you know what? Let's play through it. So we end up having a little mini adventure in the Zero Sesh to kind of get them where I wanted them. It's a beautiful day in the town of Dark Hill. Grog is outside putting up like little wanted posters to try and find Mowgli because he lost Mowgli. Tikani is putting up her polar bear in the stables because the city guard got a number of complaints when they were drinking the night prior. And Ishtar is just kind of watching over Grog, and Mowgli is with Tikani. I told that in like the worst order. Grog steals a spoon from some beggars. It's just kind of a fun way to kind of get into the RP of things and get into the swing of things. But the story really kicks off when storm clouds appear overhead, and all of a sudden everything gets a lot colder. And then the party hears some cries and some screams come from outside the city walls, but they don't seem to be alarmed by it. And in fact, Grog, who is a Boag, who is a frog person, who is a cold-blooded creature, immediately tries to go find some warmth. Tikani and Mowgli come inside the walls, and they meet up with the rest of the party. And then they hear this ringing from the gatehouse. It's a warning bell. And they see all of the city guards start to go to the walls, and they're like, oh shit, what's going on? And then Tikani realizes, oh my god, my polar bear, we gotta go. And so they start heading towards the southern gate, and they see all of the guards pile up onto the walls with their bows, and they line I bumped my mic, and they line the walls with their bows drawn, and you can hear some panic in the guardsmen's voices, and women. There's guard women in their voices as they lock, and the party hears the guard commander, "Not your arrows! Hold! Hold!" And Mike had a blast just going, "Hold!" And so the party encounters, some guardsmen. They're closing the gate, and you hear peasants from the other side, "No! Keep the gate open, please!" As they're, shutting the gate, and Ishtar's like, what's going on here? And they're like, we gotta close the gate. And Ishtar's like, we gotta get past the gate. And they're like, look, man, if you want to be a hero, be my guest. So the party goes beyond the gate, and then the gates shut behind them, and they see, the peasants like crying helplessly, and they see just behind them this massive zombie horde. Immediately, Tikani is like, where's my polar bear? I'm like, he's in the stables, like literally right next to you. And she's like, okay, I get him out. Mowgli's like, what else is in the stables? And I'm like, well, there's like 4 horses there. And he's like, okay, great. I get the horses out for everyone. There's a horse for every single person. I'm like, smart thinking. And he's like, I'm going to use my druidic abilities to speak to them, to, allow them to be our companions. I'm like, dope. So then the zombie horde approaches, and we hear the guard commander go, loose! And then just a rain of arrows just covers the sky. Okay, maybe I'm over-exaggerating a little bit. There were like, I think 50 guardsmen on the wall, so a bunch of arrows coat the sky and, hit a bunch of zombies. And so Grog takes point, and he takes his horse. He's not on his horse, and he pushes his horse forward into the zombie horde. And a bunch of zombies start, grabbing and grasping onto the horse and, trying to eat it. And Ishtar's like, oh my God, they're trying to kill his horse. I got to save him. And so Ishtar makes a couple of swings at the zombies, and he takes some zombies out. Now, anyone who's familiar with the Dungeon World monster manual is just like, how could he take some zombies out? Zombies have like 11 HP. For this prologue adventure, I wasn't treating each zombie as the zombie that is written in the book. Instead, since it was a massive horde, I kind of treated them like groups of zombies as having one zombie stat block, if that makes sense. So for the intents and purposes of the drama, he could absolutely take a couple out with his halberd. And then Mowgli, the druid, is trying to make sure that the horse doesn't die. And then finally Grog's like, let the horse die. And they're like, what? It's like, oh yeah, he's a necromancer. They let the zombies devour this poor horse, or at least kill this poor horse. And Ishtar's pretty uncomfortable by this horse just getting mauled to pieces by a zombie. So he puts the horse out of its misery. And Grog is like, finally. And he does his animate dead spell. He manages to roll a 12 or something like that, above a 10. And so it goes off without a hitch. And so the party starts, fighting off the zombies. At one point, there's like 3 zombies who attack Grog. He's like completely surrounded by them. And so Ishtar tries to help, but he rolled a 6. And so he falls off of his horse and then gets attacked by them. But then Tikani just fires an arrow and manages to kill one, but opens herself up. And it was a really great way to kind of introduce Dungeon World combat to them, which was the whole purpose of this mini adventure. This mini adventure served 2 purposes. 1, to introduce Dungeon World mechanics to the players, and 2, so that I could kind of get them where I wanted to narratively to start the actual adventure. So they have this kind of like, in my head, I kind of imagined it like the Battle of the Bastards, fighting off these zombies, except, instead of a bunch of sadistic psychopaths, it's zombies. And then I realized that there wasn't really any sort of concrete objective that they could work towards. They were just a couple of heroes surrounded by a massive horde of zombies. So I'm like, off in the distance, you see a massive trebuchet being raised, and you see that it is made up of the sort of bodies of the undead. You realize that the skeletons are climbing on top of each other and binding themselves to each other to create this massive structure. And they're like, oh shit, that's a fucking problem. So Ishtar rolls a spout lore check, and I think he got like an 8 or something like that. And he's like, yeah, I've definitely seen trebuchets before, heard of them before. He's a battle master, so that's something that he would realistically know. So he's like, we got to stop that thing. And so he like looks at the party and he's like, how can we do this? And Tikani's like, take my polar bear with you. And he's like, dope. So Ishtar gets on his horse, flanked by Tikani's polar bear, I'm blanking on the name of, and they start booking it for the undead trebuchet. The rest of them are, fighting off these zombies. At one point, Tikani rolls really well on a hack and slash roll, and so she takes her short sword and just lops the head off of one zombie before planting her dagger in another one. Once again, a full health zombie shouldn't have its head lopped off by a level 1 ranger, but I was treating the zombies as a group of having those stats, so, it fared well. Meanwhile, Ishtar rides out to the undead trebuchet, and he sees that the undead are collecting themselves in this giant ball of like nasty reanimated flesh that they're going to use to launch at the city. And you hear the guardsmen just cry out and like, oh my God, it's like, what is that thing? Freaking the fuck out. And so he rides and he manages to correctly discern realities. And he's like, okay, so I can take out the legs of this thing. And so he rides forward. And he's like, do I do a hack and slash? I'm like, no, you do a defy danger, because there's no way that you're going to miss this. You know, it's like a stationary object. You're coming straight at it. There is a chance that you get buried under this thing. And he's like, fair play. So he rides in on his horse, and he takes his halberd and he slices the leg of one, and Takani's polar bear just, collapses the leg of the other, and this giant tower begins to fall on him, and he rolls a 7 on his defy danger. So he manages to just barely get out, but it takes out his horse from under him, and he falls onto the ground. He is trapped behind enemy lines. There are a shitload of zombies between him and his allies in the city. And he's like, oh fuck. He gets ready to do a Jon Snow in the Battle of the Bastards type thing. He's like, all right, guess I'm dying here. And he tries to look out at the rest of the party, and he catches Tikani's eye, and he's out there, and he's like, fuck. Takani's like, holy shit, we need to help Ishtar. So she gets on her horse and she grabs Mowgli, and Grog is just like, leave me here. The peasants will die. Grog is just like holding off these zombies like with himself and his undead animated horse, while Takani and Mowgli ride out to Ishtar. And while they're riding out to him, Grog has his horse like eat one of the zombies' brains. And he's like, question. I was like, answer. And he's like, how linked are the brains of like, whoever raised this zombie as well as me and my horse? I'm like, well, your horse is being controlled by your will, and the move specifically says if your animated corpse eats something's brains, you get its knowledge. And he's like, so how connected is the brain of this zombie with like the necromancer? And I'm just like, I see what you're doing there. What are you trying to learn? And he's like, I want to know everything the necromancer knows. I'm like, you can't know that. However, you will learn from this zombie. You'll see kind of the moments that it was raised. And you can see that it's the necromancer is a young man. He's definitely more powerful than you, but he's definitely kind of in over his head. And so Grog's like, dope, and continues fighting off zombies. Meanwhile, Takani and Mowgli get to Ishtar, and they pick him up on their horse, and Ishtar sees on a hill there's this like scared looking teenage kid up there who's like clearly like, oh shit. I think I specifically said it's like when you accidentally like overfill your dishwasher or whatever and it starts spewing out soap everywhere. I don't know why that was the metaphor I thought of, but it felt appropriate. And they're like, okay, so we're going to ride up to the hill. And at this point, it was another thing. It's like, okay, they took out the trebuchet. They need another concrete objective, because I kind of threw them into a massive battle in the prologue. And, when you're running stuff like this, you need concrete objectives like that, because like a massive battle is just not really going to work by itself. You know what I mean? So they run up to the scared kid on the hill. And then Mowgli does this badass. He like jumps off and transforms into a leopard. And he like dives onto the scared kid, and he has his paws on him and pins him to the ground. The kid's like, oh shit. Mowgli in his leopard form pins this kid to the ground, and immediately the zombies just kind of start buzzing as a ravenous horde. So Grog notices this, so he gets onto his undead horse and starts galloping towards them. So Ishtar takes his halberd and he cuts this kid's Achilles tendon, and he's like, so he won't run away. I'm like, okay. And he starts questioning him. He's like, why? And he's like, I didn't mean to. And he's like, what, like, how did you make this happen? And he's like, ah. And right next to the kid drops this like book, this like necromancy tome. And he's like, what page did you use to summon these things? He's like, I don't know. And Ishtar's just like, well, this guy's helpful. I'm like, well, there's like a 200-pound leopard on his chest, and a giant Tusker battle master with a halberd, and meanwhile he has a zombie horde that he can't control. Kind of makes sense. He wouldn't exactly be the most what's the word? Verbose? That doesn't feel like the right word. I'm drawing a blank. So then Grog joins the rest of the party, and Grog's like, I need to eat his brain. And the kid's just like, no, please. And he's like, yes, I need to eat your brains so I can get your knowledge. He's like, no. And so then Ishtar's like, I think we need to spare this kid. Like, he didn't know what he was doing. And Grog's like, I don't care. And so then Ishtar's like, where'd you get the book? And the kid's like, my attic. I just started reading it, and all of a sudden the zombies happen. Ishtar's like, interesting. And Grog's like, wait a minute, this is definitely a better necromancer than me. And so Ishtar's like, oh, fuck this kid, he's lying. So Grog's undead horse bites this kid's head in half and just, chews it up and swallows it. And Grog gets a little bit of information and knowledge. He realizes that the kid read on page 50 And Grog opens up the book and, he studies the tome. He's like, I can't read this. I can't even read. But then, the kid's memories, he can read a little bit of it. So he calls out the next enchantment and the entire zombie horde just drops down like the droids at the end of Star Wars Episode 1, A Phantom Menace. And then Grog discovers that the kid is from this town called like Honey Hollow. And Grog is like, okay, we got to go there. And the rest of the party is like, slow down, cowboy. We just had a massive battle with a giant horde of undead. Let's slow your roll. And so then the city guardsmen come out once they see all of the zombies just, collapse. So Mowgli's like, should we get the hell out of Dodge? And Takani's like, bro, we literally just saved this city from an undead horde. Why the hell would we get out of Dodge? There's probably going to be a massive reward for us. Ishtar's like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We could probably, get a lot of money out of this. And Grog starts taking the kid's corpse and putting it into one of his canopic jars. Now, necromancers from Grimworld, like I said, they get 3 canopic jars and they're enchanted. So even though they're like the size of your hand, they can fit a whole ass corpse in it. So then the party goes and meets with the guards and they're like, you need to speak to the guard commander. And the guard commander is just like, you guys are fucking heroes. The Countess wants to see you. They're like, do we get gold? And they're like, yeah. And they're like, can we stay in the nicest inn in the city on their dime? They're like, you could stay in the castle, bro. So later that I ask him, like, is there anything else that you guys want to do in the city that has any impact? And they're like, no, not really. So later that night, they go and they meet with the Countess, who then makes them all her knights and gives them a lot of money. And that was pretty much the end of the mini adventure. Now, what's funny is I was originally only going to have the mini adventure last like an hour, but it ended up lasting 3 hours. And the Zero Sesh stuff ended up taking 2 hours. So like we played Dungeon World for 5 hours. My players were super stoked about it though. They were really fans of the system. They liked how you didn't have to make rolls unless something was uncertain. There were a couple points like during the battle where like Takani stunned one of the zombies and then Grog went up to make an attack with his knife and he's like, do I need to roll for it? And I'm like, well, the zombie's stunned. So realistically, there's 0 way that you would miss. So yeah, you can just go ahead and make it. And they're like, that makes a lot of sense. And they liked that you didn't have to make a bunch of rolls to do something. Nick was like, can Ishtar go and, take out the legs of this trebuchet? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, so do I do like an athletics, then like attack? And then I was like, just do a defy danger because you're going to hit it. It's just, will you be able to escape? And I'm like, that makes a ton of sense. And they were big fans of it too, because there's a lot less to keep track of, but it's still familiar enough to like D&D that it's not like totally alien. Like I tried to run masks for this group and they really didn't enjoy it. I thought it was pretty funny. Nick was like, yeah, we were playing masks and it just felt like we were playing teenage superheroes. And I was like, bro, that's literally the whole point of playing masks. But I digress. So the moral of the story is they were really super happy with it. Everyone had a blast. I had a great time. I'm really looking forward to this campaign. If you enjoyed this sort of low-key campaign diary and you want updates from it, please let me know. And thank you so much for watching.